So hi everyone, I'm Andrea Asamoah and I'm going to go through some of the tips and tricks of working in Microsoft Visual Studio Code. So a little bit about me. Most of my roles have predominantly been in the IT kind of space. My previous role was based at Royal Sun Alliance, so insurance. And there I was a technical system analyst. So I was doing everything from change management, project management to hands-on support. My current role is based at IQVIA. So there I'm actually a full stack developer. I develop in Golang for the back end and React.js for front end development. And currently we're creating a tool that pharmaceutical companies could use to gain patient insights based on hospital, clinic data based in the US. So a little bit of context for what I'm going to be talking about is there a right or wrong tool to use when you're developing? And the answer is there isn't. There isn't a right or wrong tool. I've listed a few of the tools that I've used in the past, as well as Microsoft Visual Studio Code that I'm using now. And I think the most important thing is that you're using a tool that you're comfortable with, that you can kind of tweak to suit your requirements, and that it has features that helps you code for the language you're coding in. So for this presentation, I'm going to focus on VS Code and show you some of the tools that I've added and some of the built-in features versus additional extensions that I've added to my environment. And this is not everything that you can use, but I just highlighted a few that I find quite useful. So jumping into VS Code, one of the first things I do when I'm in VS Code or starting it on a new Mac or new machine is picking the language that you're developing in. So the VS Code will always prompt you to choose the language. And for example, for front-end development, I'm using JavaScript, React. So I would click on that language and it starts installing the sort of linting rules in the background. And when you're developing, you always want to try and catch errors as early as possible. So having the language support there is really, really crucial when you're developing in VS Code, just so that you see those errors early and you can correct them as you're going along. If you don't add it straight away, you can add this later. So I'll show you a little bit later how to get to the extension screen. So if you forget to do that straight away, you can always add that. The terminal. So one thing that I quite like to do is make sure that when I'm coding and I have my file open, I have the terminal available as well. So you can get to the terminal by clicking on the menu bar at the top, clicking on terminal and then selecting new terminal, as you can see on the side here. And this is useful because sometimes if you've got one screen, you don't want to have to keep switching between your codes and the terminal, whether that's in Windows or a Mac. It's just helpful if you've only got one screen that you're using for development. It's nice to have the terminal there, so any quick commands that you want to type in, for example, like git, or if I want to do npm start for React, to start a React project, you can quickly do that all in one space instead of switching all the time. So this is something that I find quite useful. That's not to say you can't still use a terminal outside of this window, but I find it's quite useful to have this there. And as you can see, it brings it at the bottom of the screen. The split editor. So another thing that I like to do is sometimes if I'm working on a really long file, I want to compare something at the top of the file here with something at the bottom of the file. You can actually split your screen by clicking on the split editor icon, and that way you can view the same file at the same time, but view different parts of it side by side. If I want to, it doesn't have to be the same file, it might be a different file. So I could drag and drop a different file onto here, and I could split the screen 3 ways or 4 ways or as many ways as I want to fit on the screen at that point in time. And it doesn't have to be vertical. It could be a horizontal split. I could have 2 files on this screen and 1 file on this screen. It's totally up to you depending on what you're trying to compare. Extensions. So far I've focused on the built-in extensions that come in with VS Code. you can actually, sorry, the built-in features, you can actually add many, many extensions that are available if you click on the extensions icon on the sidebar. So once I click on that, I'm presented with all the extensions that I currently have set up. But if I want to search for something that I feel, oh, I want to do something with colors or JavaScript, you type in the keyword you need in here. And once you've typed in that keyword, it will find extensions that are available for that word that you've typed in. So here you can see the name of the extension, the author, and the version number. And at any point, if I want to add, disable any extensions I've added, I always can come back to this screen on the sidebar. So if I jump into some of the extensions I've added, Git Lens is something I use for version control. Actually, VS Code does have inbuilt support for Git, but I actually prefer Git Lens because it's a bit more of an advanced feature. So once I've added this through my extensions, it appears on the sidebar, this icon. And if I click on this icon, I can look at if I've committed files over time, or if I'm working in a group project, I can see for that all the branches that are available for this particular project I'm working on, all the commits that have been done for each file. And if I want to find a particular file that I'm working on that I know, oh, somebody's changed something, I'm not sure what they changed or what happened, I can click on that particular commit and then see this file, the lines that have changed. And as you can see here, line by line, I can look at in more detail at the file and find out lines that have been added, lines that have been removed, and I can decide whether I want to make my changes on top of that. So this is really helpful when you've done something a long time ago and you've added that to your version control, but you don't want to, you've added that to your version control, but you want to go back in time to remember what you're doing. So if I jump to the next slide. So Prettier. So Prettier is an add-in that provides auto formatting. So for Prettier, what I tend to do is I add that quite early on in my development, and it's useful if you're, again, in a big team, or even for yourself, where you want the auto formatting available. And when I say auto formatting, sometimes when you're developing in JavaScript, you want to indent your lines by a certain amount. You might want single quotes you might want all your quotes to be single quotes, or you might want them to be double quotes. If you set up your auto formatting at the beginning, when you're saving your files, it does this formatting for you. And it can really help, trust me, when you're in big projects and you're reviewing other people's code. When you've got the consistent format, it helps you make sure that you're actually reviewing functionality and you're not having to worry about formatting. So the color highlight does exactly what it says. This is another tool extension I've added. As you can see here, once you've added the tool, it doesn't actually add an icon to the sidebar. It's something that you see as you're developing. So if I've got hexadecimal codes or RGB codes, when I'm doing front-end development, I want to see straight away what that color is and not have to switch between my code and the browser. And again, if you're on one screen, it's very helpful if you've only got one screen available, then you don't have to keep switching between the code, and straight away I can see, that's that color. No, I don't quite like that color. I want to change it. So again, this is something that just, for me, speeds up development sometimes. So to go on to the to-do tree, this is, I'm someone that likes writing to-do lists all the time. And sometimes when you want to write something that you want to catch later or have a look at later, I don't always want to write this in a separate list and try and remember where it was in the code. So by adding this to-do feature, again, it's an extension, it appears on the sidebar. And once I've added this feature, if I put any to-do comments within my code, when I click on this link, it shows me all the to-do comments in every single file that I've added it. And you can see within the code, it doesn't look like it's a normal comment. It is a comment, but it's a slightly different color. And then here I can click on any of these and it will take me to that exact file and that line of where it is in the code. And again, it's useful for me, myself, or if I'm working in a group project, I can also share this among the team if other people have this extension too. And I can filter on this list at any time. Just to wrap up, here are my contact details if any of you want to reach out, and I've included a couple of links which showcase a few of the extensions I've personally added and many more. As you can see, I've only showcased a few here, but I think it's always good to get your environment set up that works for you. So I'm going to stop there and say thanks very much. Is there any questions?
Thank you so much, Andrea. There are a couple of questions that have been coming in.
Go for it.
While you were chatting. So there's one question from Leah who's asked, is there auto import extensions for React?
And there is actually, so to clarify, do you mean adding extensions for the JavaScript? Because actually the underlying language is JavaScript, and you can get ES6 linting rules. So I've actually, if I go back to the slide, I've added this, and this adds an ES6 extension on top of that. I haven't seen one that I personally like specifically for React, but that's not to say there isn't one. So what I always do if I'm unsure and I want to find something, I just search for the extensions. I'll type in React. I personally don't have one that specifically says React. Have a look and see if there's an extension that you like the look of, and add it, play around, see whether it's something that you want to have a go with. I'll actually stop sharing so I can see everyone, and then add it, have a go with it. And there's no contract. Once you've used it, you don't like it, you can always remove that add in later if it doesn't fit your requirements. I hope that answers the question.
Well, if not, Leah, feel free to ask a follow-up. There's another question from Kanju who's asked, I often have problems with live server and I have now stopped using it. Is there another way to have a live update?
When you say live server, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. It's not something I'm familiar with.
Maybe well, I'll let Kanju sort of clarify that. In the meantime, there's another question saying, is VS Code what most people use in software engineering roles?
I don't think there is one tool. I think with development tools that you get over time, you always get new tools that come out, enhanced tools. At the moment, that's what I'm currently using, and I actually use at work because I do both front end and back end, and I can use it for both. I think what's more important is sometimes having a play around with the tools, especially if the tools are free and open source and available to use. Have a play around with it, see whether it works for you. It's what I'm using at work and at home, but it doesn't mean to say every company out there that's doing software engineering is using that tool. And actually a few people, we have people that develop in other languages at work that use other tools. So there's definitely not one. It's just something I'm using at the moment, and I wouldn't ever restrict yourself. If you find something better that you're more comfortable with, definitely go for that.
And we have another question from Sumi Trainer, who's asked, in Sublime, you can follow your methods and classes easily. Can you do something like that in VS Code?
Yes, in VS Code you can, like if you've typed in a variable, you can like click on that variable and find all references for a function or something that you've done. And if you're looking at a function call, you can go back to its implementation. So there's definitely things that you can do that's built in that allows you to follow the tree or follow something through. But there's also extensions that you can add, like a back and forward button. So if I want to click, if I'm clicking on a file and then I go into another and another, and I'm finding I'm going so deep and I want to remember, oh, what file was I on before? You can actually add that as an extension, and just literally like you have in a browser back and forward, you can add that to VS Code as well. So that's something that I've added and taken away, and it's just depending on how I feel, whether, oh, yep, this is quite useful, I want to keep this tool for a bit. But there's definitely inbuilt support for that.
Are there any other questions? I think someone has clarified what live server is. They said it's an extension which gets your browser to update once you save a change in the editor.
Yes, I guess what I do with my React project, I use something called Create React App, and I do sort of a npm start in the terminal. So yes, as I'm typing and saving my files, that does update the code automatically, but that's not specific to VS Code. That's just something I've done with Create that comes out of the box with Create React App, and that when I'm saving the project, it will update in the browser. So I haven't actually used the live server feature itself. This is just something that comes with Create React App.
All right, someone said, can you do another talk for Golang?
With VS Code or Golang in particular, or just something general?
I'll wait for a Golang IDE.
I actually don't use the Golang IDE because I use VS Code. I do have a few colleagues at work that do use the Golang IDE, and actually it's got much more support that's catered to Golang. So it's not something I'm extremely familiar with, but maybe I can encourage them to come and do a talk and share some of their findings.
That'd be great. Always looking for talks. So are there any more questions? It doesn't seem like there are any more. So thank you so much, Andrea. We'll be sharing Andrea's slides with everyone as well, in case everyone's sort of frantically trying to.
Thank you.